The bridge cannot hold! We must move back!
The night the bridge broke, it sounded like the cracking of a giant spine. Sharp, painful, final. Monsoon winds screamed across the valley while the river below raged like a living beast. Lightning split the sky, exposing terrified villagers huddled on the bank, their faces drained of color as they watched the old wooden bridge shudder against the fury of the flood. Beam by beam, it trembled under the force of the swollen water. Then, with a thunderous snap that echoed through the darkness, the bridge jerked, tilted, and surrendered to the river's wrath. And in that terrible moment, a single lantern slipped from a villager's trembling hand. It fell in slow motion into the churning water, its warm glow swallowed instantly, as if hope itself had been extinguished. When the last plank disappeared beneath the current, one question hung over the valley, like a warning. What happens to a community when the only thing connecting them to safety disappears overnight? Before that disaster, the village of Gul Nadi had been a place of quiet routines and simple joys. At the heart of it all was Fatima, a bright 17-year-old who filled the margins of her school books with sketches of bridges. She dreamed of becoming an engineer, someone who could build structures that would never fall. Beside her, in curiosity and encouragement, stood Baba Adil, a carpenter in his 60s, whose hands were rough from years of work, but gentle when he spoke of the river, the land, and the lessons they carried. Meanwhile, Shabazz, the village elder, guarded the stories of their people and often reminded the children that the bridge was more than wood and rope. It was the village's promise to the world beyond the river. Even so, the bridge itself was beginning to tell a different story. Though it still stood with the dignity of an aging family member, it had grown tired. It carried farmers to market, children to school, and the sick to the distant clinic. Yet beneath its familiar creaks were signs of danger that few wanted to face. Ropes were thinning like stretched thread. Beams had darkened with rot, and rusted nails were loosening into dust. Long ago, the bridge was built after a devastating flood, and although the river shone golden in the peaceful sun, history was quietly waiting to return. No one knew how soon. In the weeks before the monsoon, Fatima spent her evenings studying old notebooks and borrowed pamphlets on climate change. The patterns were impossible to ignore. Rainfall had been increasing year after year, pushing the river closer to its edge. With growing anxiety, she spread her sketches on the table and pointed to the lines she had drawn. "If this continues," she said softly, "the bridge won't survive another season." At the same time, Baba Adil stood beside the structure one quiet morning, running his fingers across a deep crack in a beam. "Wood remembers everything," he murmured. "Every storm, every burden. It's telling us it's tired." Soon after, the village council gathered, and the atmosphere grew tense. Some people called for immediate repairs, while others insisted the bridge had survived worse. Shabazz tried to guide the discussion with calm wisdom, but limited funds and competing needs clouded every decision. No one wanted to admit how vulnerable they truly were. Meanwhile, along the riverbank, a fraying rope swayed in the wind, its threads splitting apart like the village's fading preparedness. The warnings were visible, whispered, and measurable, yet routine had made everyone too comfortable, and all the while, the river waited. Then the monsoon arrived, and it did not come gently. It hammered the rooftops, rattled the walls, and turned the sky into a gray curtain. For days, relentless rain blurred the horizon, each drop adding weight to the swelling river. The gentle current became a roaring force, as if the valley itself were being rewritten. Fatima's mother urged everyone to evacuate early. "We should evacuate now," she pleaded, but many villagers hesitated, clinging to the belief that the bridge had always protected them. "It will hold," they repeated, as though confidence alone could strengthen rotten wood. However, one stormy evening, the inevitable began. The river surged violently against the bridge's base, shaking the structure from below. Lightning flashed again and again, revealing ropes snapping one by one like overstretched nerves. A lantern slipped from a villager's grasp and spiraled downward, its light dimming as it disappeared into the black flood. Fatima reached out helplessly, as though her hands alone could pull the bridge back together. Baba Adil closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, his voice trembling with sorrow. Then came the final crack, loud enough to silence every breath in the village. The bridge folded inward and vanished into the raging water. Shock, fear, stillness. The village's lifeline was gone, swallowed by the same river that once nourished it. In the days that followed, Gul Nadi felt like an island abandoned by the world. Food supplies dwindled quickly because merchants could no longer cross the river. School was suspended indefinitely, leaving children restless and confused. Worse still, a fever spread through several households, and without access to the clinic across the water, even small illnesses became frightening. Children wandered to the broken stump of the bridge and touched the splintered wood as if trying to understand how something so important could simply disappear. Across the river, a lone goat bleated in helpless isolation, becoming a symbol of the village's own separation. For Fatima, the loss cut even deeper. She sat on the riverbank, clutching her water-damaged engineering notebook, the last thing she had from her father, who had died in a previous flood while trying to rescue neighbors. Every blurred sketch reminded her of all she hoped to build, yet could not build fast enough. She felt powerless watching her community fray, thread by thread, like the rope that had once held the bridge together. And beneath the daily struggle, a painful truth settled over the village. Without backup routes, stored food, emergency plans, or safe alternatives, their lifeline had been far too fragile. Now, everyone was paying the price. Yet, even in the middle of that grief, the river began to calm. One misty morning, as the water softened into a tired murmur, Fatima opened her soaked notebook. The pages were warped and stained, but enough of her sketches remained for her to draw again. This time, however, she drew with greater purpose. She began designing a bridge raised higher above the floodline, anchored with stronger materials, and shaped to bend without breaking under pressure. Baba Adil watched silently before kneeling beside her. "Your father once told me that the land teaches us how to build, if we are willing to listen." Then he shared stories of old local techniques, stone foundations, woven bamboo supports, and layered reinforcements tested by generations. Later that day, Shabazz gathered the villagers beneath the shade of a large neem tree. A bridge is not only wood, it is people willing to reach each other. His words stirred something long buried in their hearts: courage. That night, Fatima lit a small candle and placed it on the windowsill. Its flame fluttered in the dark, illuminating her new sketches. It became a symbol of resilience, and more importantly, a symbol of beginning again. A single spark, she realized, could change everything. When the engineers finally arrived in Gul Nadi, Fatima's rough drawings surprised them. Her lines were not polished, but they carried hope, precision, and lived experience. Instead of dismissing her ideas, the engineers spread the pages across a bamboo table and began refining them together with the villagers. It became clear that a resilient bridge would require more than expertise alone. It would need collective memory, local wisdom, and shared responsibility. So they blended traditional knowledge with modern engineering, bamboo for flexibility, stone for stability, and reclaimed steel for strength and symbolism, turning what had once been debris into protection. The new design was lifted above the floodline and anchored deep into the earth like roots refusing to be uprooted. As construction began, the whole village came alive with purpose. Women prepared warm meals for the workers, young people formed teams to haul stones from the riverbank, carpenters shaped beams with steady, rhythmic taps that echoed across the valley. And as the skeleton of the bridge slowly rose, its curved frame began to resemble the ribs of a giant guardian. It seemed to breathe with the spirit of the people, reminding everyone that the community itself was the true heart of survival. At the same time, Fatima encouraged simple preparedness measures, neighbors checking on neighbors, shared emergency supplies, and clear evacuation paths. Little by little, a stronger culture of safety was being built alongside the bridge. But just as the final beams were being lifted into place, the sky darkened with a familiar warning. Heavy rain rolled in without mercy, drumming against the half-finished structure. Fear rippled through the crowd because everyone remembered the last disaster too clearly. For a moment, history felt dangerously close to repeating itself. Still, Fatima stood firm. "We built this together," she said, her voice steady even as thunder growled overhead. "Trust our work." The villagers hesitated, then tightened ropes, secured bolts, and held the beams steady while the engineers shouted instructions over the storm's roar. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating Fatima's open notebook. Rain splattered the pages, but the ink did not run. The drawings remained intact. Resilience on paper, mirroring resilience in action. Then, as the last beam locked into place, the storm raged on, yet the bridge stood unmoved. The people trembled, but they did not break. They had changed. They were no longer helpless victims of the river. They had become its equal. And when the monsoon eventually unleashed its full fury, the river rose violently again, churning and snarling as if testing their newfound courage. Waves slammed against the bridge's pillars and sent white foam spraying into the air. Families gathered along the banks, holding their breath and clutching one another. But the bridge, their bridge, stood firm. Not a tremor, not a crack, only solid, calm strength. A shout rose from the crowd, and then another, until the entire village erupted in cheers. Some people cried openly, others hugged whoever stood nearest. For the first time in years, fear loosened its grip. At sunrise, as the storm clouds drifted away, Fatima stepped onto the completed bridge. Golden light washed over the bamboo curves and steel joints, turning the structure into a glowing promise. Below, the river moved more gently, as if it too had acknowledged the village's triumph. Hope had returned, not as a dream, but as something they could walk across. In the calm that followed, Fatima stood beneath the bridge and listened to the softened murmur of the river. She understood then that resilience was never hidden in bamboo or steel alone. It lived in the hands that built, the hearts that volunteered, and the voices that refused to surrender. Preparedness, she realized, was never about fear. It was an act of love, an act of protecting children, honoring ancestors, and choosing a safer future together. The village had discovered that the power to rebuild did not come from distant experts alone. It came from within them, rising stronger after every disaster. Finally, with quiet reverence, Fatima placed her father's weathered notebook inside a small wooden box and slid it beneath the bridge's main pillar. It was a symbolic offering, past lessons supporting future generations. Then she stepped back and whispered a thought that would echo far beyond the river. Some bridges connect land, others connect hearts, but the strongest bridges are the ones we build together, long before the next storm arrives.